Hi, everyone. I'm Hassan Abbas. I'm a distinguished professor of international relations at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Today, I'll be talking to you about politics and security in Iraq. Um, and I will focus on 5 major factors that we have to keep in view if we want to really understand the political, social, and security dynamics in Iraq and in the broader region. As you all know, I'm sure, Iraq has gone through a political transformation, a political transition after a prolonged deadlock of a few months and few attempts to look for an ideal prime minister from the available parliament and available leadership. Iraq finally picked a prime minister in early May 2020, a person with a very interesting background. He was the intelligence chief of Iraq, also remained a journalist who had worked from exile during the times of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. But he has been an intelligence chief for the last about 5 years or so, and has made a name for himself as somebody who's politically neutral and above political divisions or above sectarian politics in Iraq. The point here is to look at the broader themes which will help us understand the political stage through which Iraq is going at this time. And the first factor I think that we have to keep in view is the historical context. I think Iraq is still struggling to come out of the haunting era of the autocrat and dictator Saddam Hussein. The oppression and the violence that Iraq had gone through, Saddam Hussein's era, created tribalism, created sectarianism, and led to severe disconnect between different factions, ethnic, political, and religious within Iraq. While Saddam was there, it looked as if he's in complete control of the situation. But we know there were these simmering conflicts and underdevelopment and social and cultural oppression and disconnect that Iraq was struggling through. Although now it's almost 17 years since Iraq is out of that dark era, still, as we know, authoritarianism has a way to have a deep impact on societies, and it's not a matter of few years or just the elimination of one leader that a state can transform quickly. The historical context is important for the reason that during the Saddam era, there were certain discrepancies and certain inequalities in terms of development focus, in terms of privilege for certain factions and certain groups that divided the Iraqi society. So bringing Iraq together is an ongoing challenge that Iraq is going through. But keep in view the challenges of the Saddam era still haunt Iraqi society. I'll give you one example. Despite the democratic experience that Iraq has gone through in the last 17 years or so, many Iraqi political leaders, democratically elected leaders, are still fearful of a rise of a military general as a new autocrat. That's why we have seen whenever there is a military general who's very successful, like there was one, without naming anyone, a general who did very well in the anti-ISIS or anti-Daesh military operations. But the previous prime minister removed that general from a very important counterterrorism role just because there was a fear. What if there's a very popular Iraqi general? What if the outside countries, the Western capitals, or somebody in the region would support that general to take over. That was, my assessment, that that issue was not real. But given the history of Iraq, I understand why some politicians and religious political leaders in Iraq thought that's still possible. So that had led to the sidelining of that general. But this is more about a mindset and because of a problem of a historical nature. So we have to keep in view the autocratic reality that is embedded in the mindset of many people in Baghdad, and that's the factor number one. Secondly, I think it's important to understand the role of religion in the Iraqi society. Although Iraq has come a long way since 2003, and since then we had seen a sectarian conflict. Iraq is a Muslim majority state with the Shia Muslims about 60 to 65%. Some believe 70%. Nonetheless, it's perhaps the only country in the region, other than Iran, but among the Arab nations, it's the only country with Shia majority. In the other countries around Iraq, in Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Bahrain, Qatar, there are Shia strongholds, or I should say Shia populations. In Bahrain, Shia Muslims are also in a majority as a population. The point here is that Iraq, because of its this sectarian mix, is in a unique position, and that is its strength also in a sense, but it's also a potential to be misused or played with, as we had seen in the case of the rise of Daesh. Daesh was able to, or ISIS or ISIL, whatever name or title we give it, it was able to gain a lot of strength among the extremists, because they were able to build their narrative on sectarian bigotry and religious extremism. So role of religion is a very important role. The cities of Karbala, Najaf, Baghdad, also Kadhimiya, Samarra, these are very important centers of Muslim pilgrimage as well, mostly for Shia Muslims, but also for Sunni Muslims. And they are very important shrines associated with Sunni Islam as well, right in the heart of Baghdad. And that has to be kept in view as well. Many Sunni Muslims from South Asia, Southeast Asia, they visit those Sunni major shrines of some great Sufi mystics and personalities who had played a very important role in the Sunni jurisprudence, that they are buried in Baghdad. So it's a holy land. It's a land of prophets, and religion plays a very important role also, because Najaf is the center of Shia Islam across the world. It houses the most important religious ceremony for Shia Muslims. So religion is very much embedded into the identity of Iraq. We've also seen this is linked to the whole power and influence of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani, whose support for democracy and democratic model was extremely important for Iraq, and his leadership in a religious sense, but also his influence on politics, has had a huge impact on the political direction of Iraq. So role of religion has to be kept in mind as the second most important factor in this regard. The third factor that I want you to keep in mind is the political and constitutional setup. And Iraq is still going through a constitutional reform effort as well. Currently, the way it stands, the whole system is built on proportional representation. Also, there is an understanding through constitutional support that the three major offices, the office of the President of Iraq, the Prime Minister, and the Speaker of the Parliament, that these will be given to different groups, like on a Lebanese model, if you may call that. A Prime Minister of Iraq is supposed to be a Shia Muslim. The President of Iraq is supposed to be a Kurd. and the Speaker of the Parliament is supposed to be a Sunni Muslim. In principle, ideally, it's a great combination, and it's a great way to balance power, but whether it is going to take care of the sectarian rifts or not in the long run, it is yet to be seen. And whether this is purely fits into a democratic model or not, to divide important positions on the basis of ethnic or sectarian identity, this is an interesting experiment, and we had seen it didn't work in Lebanon initially. Later on it worked in some fashion. Whether it is suitable for Iraq or not, it is yet to be seen. But so far so good. We are seeing in recent past that the three office holders were able to collaborate. So the political and a constitutional framework and the challenges seen by this system is a third factor that we have to keep in mind, because it's going through this constitutional setup is going through a tough time. And as the protests in Iraq had shown us, the ordinary Iraqis are perhaps not satisfied with this constitutional political setup, because they are seeing the same people coming into power through one door or the other. And although this provides representation to all the three major groups in Iraq, whether religious or ethnic, but for the ordinary people, what matters the most is economic opportunities, employment, security, to name the three most important. And they are neither satisfied nor happy about it. And I should have mentioned, I say this based not only on my study and understanding of Iraqi politics, but being somewhat a frequent visitor of Iraq. I have traveled to Iraq many times in the recent years, almost twice every year for the last many years, and I've interviewed and interacted with political leaders in Baghdad and religious scholars in the south, and on the other side as well. The fourth factor that I would mention here is the regional challenge and the regional tensions. Of course, the neighborhood of Iraq is mostly Muslim majority states. There are tribal, ethnic, and religious connections all around. But also there's, again, history. There's also discomfort. Iraq, being a democracy, is a challenge for the region in a different sense. None of the countries in the neighborhood have a similar political system. So they view Iraq as a rising state, as an economic competitor. Also at times, for those who are conservative, or I would say actually extremists from a religious point of view, they view the religious and sectarian identity of Iraq also as a challenge. Others are too much overwhelmed by the historical context. For instance, between Jordan and Iraq, there is an issue. Between Iraq and Saudi Arabia and other countries, there are I would argue ups and downs in relationships, but there's a history. Saddam Hussein had supporters in the region who were supporting Saddam Hussein because they wanted Saddam to be able to push back a rising Iran, or Iran which was aggressive in an ideological sense. So those relationships were also there. The point mainly here is the regional atmosphere is also not very congenial at the moment, because there's fear, there is apprehensions, there's skepticism, and we have not seen a regional harmony which becomes the dominant factor in that region yet. But so that has to be kept in mind as well. And last but not the least factor, I mentioned I'll talk about 5, so I'm now at number 5. The fifth factor is, of course, the elephant in the room. Iran, the Iranian influence in Iraq. We have seen Iranian expansion in Iraq in terms of influence, in economic terms, in terms of influence in the south because of the Shia networks talking to each other. Also because they have a long border, and there's a long history. So there is a deep-rooted relationship, which is religious, which is social as well. So you cannot cut off the two. But the challenge has been that Iran was able to use the Iraqi space for its own security, its own political and its own economic interests as well. And Iraq itself, whether Shia leaders or Sunni leaders, they are divided about how much space Iran should have in Iraq. And most importantly, the role of Iran in Iraq is something which is seen very closely from Western capitals, from whether London or Washington, D.C. And we have seen in January 2020 the killing of two important leaders, one Iraqi and one Irani, and that had created big issues in regional politics, and that was one way, one lens to look at what haunts the Iran-Iraq relationship. Iraqis want to be independent. They want to make their own political decisions, whereas for Iran, their expansion or their interests or their influence in Iraq is a way to show their strategic depth in Iran, in Iraq. So this final factor, the Iran factor, is extremely important. Again, the purpose here is to give you a broader picture of what are the five dynamics that will help us understand the direction of Iraq. So yes, there is now relatively more political stability. We know there is a prime minister who has a new cabinet, but the security and political issues, as I explained in terms of these five major themes and five major dynamics, I should say, are extremely important. And so long as there is a flux of these five factors at play, you will see this constant tension and constant challenges. And then, last but not the least, this is happening in the era of COVID-19 challenge, a major health emergency that the world is going through, that is having a huge impact in Iraq as well. And most importantly, the falling prices of the oil and Iraqi economy being so hugely dependent on oil revenue. This means that Iraq will go through a huge economic challenge in coming months and years. So there's a long road ahead to political stability. I think, based on my understanding and my experience with Iraq, Iraq is a resilient nation. They are an old civilization. They are people who have gone through very tough times, but they have shown that they have a will and courage to progress. And we see in the region, the many countries which are economically more prosperous, there has to be a kind of more regional harmony, which will give more space to stability and progress in Iraq. Iraq receives millions, tens of millions of pilgrims every year. The Iraqi South, as I mentioned, whether it was for the Shia Muslims or Sunni Muslims or for the Sufis, Iraq is a hub. They can convert this into trade opportunities, into becoming a bridge between different nations, whether between the Arab world and Iran or between the West and the region. Iraq has a great potential. And we really hope that the five factors that you mentioned, that Iraq will be able to convert those challenges and at times which come across as weaknesses into its strength. So our very best wishes for Iraq. Thank you very much for listening, and look forward to any feedback that you can provide. Thank you. Goodbye.